boys and girls, and welcome to this week's topic lesson. This week we're going to look at the Vikings in Scotland, and we're going to focus our learning on evidence. So far you have been looking at the Vikings, and you currently can name the countries that the Vikings came from, and you labelled them on a map. You can name some of the places that the Vikings moved to, and you can describe how they travelled there. And you can also recall some facts about Viking longships. That's what we've looked at so far during home learning on the Vikings. Today, we're moving on to look at evidence that the Vikings came to Scotland. So by the end of today's lesson, you will be able to describe what evidence is, describe some examples of archaeological evidence that prove the Vikings were in Scotland, describe some of the place names that show that the Vikings were in Scotland, and describe some of the written records that show that the Vikings were in Scotland. So let's start with archaeological evidence. Boys and girls, before you start, please get your worksheet out, your paper pack for this week's learning, and we'll use it as we go on. So archaeological evidence. So what is an archaeologist? Well, an archaeologist is a person who studies human history through the excavation of sites and the analysis of artifacts and other physical remains. So you can see here that this person's got a paintbrush and they're painting and they are dusting, using it as a duster. So they're dusting away to get to a piece of evidence. And here's a group of archaeologists up here in the top right that are also looking at evidence. And what they sometimes do is they look at it and they work out how old the piece of evidence is. Sometimes they will then take the evidence away and it will go into a museum for other people to see. And this helps them understand the history of the area. So these are two pieces of archaeological evidence that show that the Vikings were in Scotland. First of all, this handle here is called the Kildonan egg sword handle. Now, it was found on the Isle of Egg, which is on the west coast of Scotland, and it dates back to Viking times, and you can see that it's made out of metal and it's very intricate designs. So this is something that they were able to date back to being found in Viking times, and it was found in the islands. On the Isle of on Eriskay in the Western Isles, they found this sword. Now these are sort of remnants of sword, which they've also dated back to Viking times. So they found some evidence of swords. Now they also found across the UK there is 400 Viking burial sites. So they found skeletons or pieces of skeletons from Viking times. And this is what archaeologists do. They will find the skeletons and they will date them back. Storms in the Orkney Islands in this picture exposed a Viking cemetery. So the storms came and eroded the land and exposed a Viking cemetery that dated back 1,500 years. And they used sandbags, which are here, to try to protect the evidence from the storm so that they could date the evidence and work out what it was. So there's been skeletons found from Viking times in Scotland. This comb is made of bone and it was found in Caithness, which in Freswick Bay, and it dates back to 800 to 1100 AD. And Caithness is up here, and this is another piece of evidence that they found from Viking times in Scotland. These are called the Lewis Chessmen. Now, archaeologists think that they were probably made in 1150 in Norway, and in 1831 they were found in the island of Lewis. In Scotland, just off Scotland up here. So task 1, using your mind map on your worksheet, please create notes on the information you've just heard about under the heading archaeological evidence. So you should have 4 pieces of information to bullet point under there. So you can pause the video and go and do that now. So the next piece of evidence we're going to look at is place names. Now in Scotland there are many Viking place names. I'm just going to move myself to the middle so you can see the map better. In Shetland there is places called Lerwick, Kirkcalbister, Papastur, Laxford and Fula, and these are all Viking place names. Oopsie-daisies. In Orkney, which is another island down here, there's Westray, Kirkwall and Hoy, and these are all Viking place names as well. And in the Western Isles, there's Stornoway, Eriskay that we spoke about earlier, Vaternish and Scalpay, and these are all Viking names. And then in mainland Scotland, there's places like Wick, Stroma, Brora, Stemster, Dingwall, which is here, and Eskdale, which are all Viking names. Now, this next picture is a picture of the sign that welcomes people to Lerwick, which is in Shetland, and it says Lerwick, and then it says Old Norse Muddy Bay. Now, Norse was the language that they spoke and used in Viking times. So Lerwick in English means muddy bay, so muddy area. So your second part of your task is to use your mind map on your worksheet and to create notes using the information you've just heard about place names. So you should have 2 or 3 bullet points about place names that you can add to your mind map. So moving on to the third piece of evidence, we're going to look at written records. Now, Viking runes were written by the Vikings. These Viking runes in the background here, this is them, the sort of lines, and these were how the Vikings communicated when they weren't speaking, how they communicated in a written form. And these runes were found in Orkney. Now, this record is about the Vikings, and it's called the Lindisfarne Chronicle, and it was written by monks who described a Viking attack on their abbey in 793. So a really old piece of evidence that was about the Vikings. So there's written records that are written about the Vikings and also written records that the Vikings created themselves. So your third part of task 1 is to use your mind map and finish it off this time by creating some notes about written records. So maybe 2 or 3 points about written records that proved that the Vikings were in Scotland. So moving on to the next part of the task, we're going to focus a little bit more on Viking runes. So Viking letters are called runes, and they weren't written with pens and paper because they didn't have that back then, and instead they were carved in using a knife into stone or wood. So this is an example of a stone. I think it was found on the Isle of Egg in the Western Isles, and you can see the messages here, the letters, like that. And then this is just an example that's been painted over to make it stand out more. So evidence of Viking runes have been found across Scotland. So this suggests that Vikings were in Scotland as well. So my question to you is, this is the Viking Runic alphabet. You'll notice that there is a symbol for most letters. However, for I and J, they have the same letter and the same symbol, and for U, V and W, they've got the same letter as well. So my question for you is, why do you think that there are no curved letters in the Runic alphabet? So write down your answer please on your sheet. Now your second task is to use the Viking alphabet to write your name on your worksheet. And after you've finished, I'd like you to write a message for a friend or someone in your family to try and translate using the Viking Runic alphabet. They'll probably need that because not many people know it. So do you give them the alphabet, write them a message, and they can translate it. And then maybe they can write you a message back. So boys and girls, today we've been learning about the Vikings in Scotland. We've been focusing on learning on evidence. So what is evidence? So evidence is information or physical things that show that something has happened. We can describe some examples of archaeological evidence. We looked at the Lewis Chessmen, we looked at swords. Then this all proves, because they were found in Scotland, this all proves that the Vikings were in Scotland. We've looked at some place names and what they're called, for example, Lerwick, which is in Old Norse, and some other areas and what they were called and how this relates to the Vikings. We also looked at some written records. We looked at the Viking Runic alphabet and the Lindisfarne Chronicle, and these are all evidence that the Vikings were in Scotland. So boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed learning about that today, and I'm really looking forward to seeing your work. Please upload it to your learning journals or on Teams. Bye for now.